What's up, y'all? Fall is just around the corner, which means it's time for me to start preparing my garden beds for all of those new plants that I want to grow in the cool season weather: beets, lettuce, carrots. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I use different soil conditioners and soil amendments to prepare my beds to do 3 things this fall. The first one is to make sure that I get all of my macronutrients back into the soil. The second goal is to make sure that I put more organic matter into my soil. The third thing is raising my soil to a pH that is decent for growing vegetables. The specific items I'm going to be using: number 1 is black cow compost. This is just straight cow manure. It's really rich and it's going to give that organic matter that I need. I'm also going to be using a vegetable fertilizer. This one is balanced, so it's an equal amount of all the macronutrients that I need: the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, to make sure that I get a really good even start at the beginning of my growing season. The third thing I'm going to be using is garden lime, and this is going to gently raise the pH of my soil over the next few weeks. And last, I'm going to use just a little bit of perlite, and this is going to make sure that there's proper air circulation in my soil and that the soil doesn't become really tight and compacted over the growing season. What tools am I actually going to use to get this done? Believe it or not, you only need 2. All I'm going to be using is a spading fork. This is basically for loosening up the soil, turning it over so it's not so tight, and just break up everything so that I can actually get the compost, get all the amendments into the soil. And then I'm also going to be using a bow rake. This is going to help me mix in all of the amendments with the soil and get the soil back to that like light, fluffy, small granular texture. I started working on this bed behind me first. This bed, I didn't remove everything because I still have things in production that I definitely want to keep. I actually worked 2/3 of the soil, everything basically that was not within the root zone of what's already growing. The first thing I did is I went in with my spading fork and I just gently loosened up the soil, turning it over, digging about 8 inches deep, making sure that I really break up to the depth where the roots would extend. Not all the way to the bottom of the bed, but just enough to where I could apply some amendments at a good depth. Along the way, I was removing any roots that I saw. It's dang near impossible to empty the bed of everything. Like, there's a lot of really small roots that you end up seeing in the soil. Then there's also a lot of big roots. Like, I tried growing watermelon this season. It didn't quite work out, but the roots for the watermelon were so big and they stretched all across the bed. So every time I turned the soil over, I was just kind of removing things that I knew I didn't want there anymore. After that, because I was left with these big clods of soil, I went in with a bow rake and I just gently kind of like broke up those big chunks and smoothed the soil out to a fluffy consistency so that it would be easier to do the next step. The next step was applying the compost, right? This compost, like I said before, is just straight cow manure. It's really gentle because the NPK percentages are balanced. So you're literally only getting 0.5% of nitrogen, 0.5% of potassium, 0.5% of phosphorus. It's really hard to overdo it with this compost, which is what I really like. All I did was follow the directions on the bag. So for this particular bed, I used about 3 bags, which gave me about 1 inch of compost worked into my soil. Like, if you're thinking about 1 inch on a very level, consistent plane, I got about 1 inch of it. Once I had this in the soil, all I did was get the bow rake and kind of rake it through, break it up, and just make sure that it was properly distributed and mixed into the soil. Once I did that, it was really easy to go in and just add the fertilizer. I actually got this on Amazon, and this is a pretty strong fertilizer, so it's balanced and it's a 13-13-13, which means that I'm getting 13% nitrogen, 13% phosphorus, 13% potassium, right? So it's a good start just from a general nutritional standpoint. And it's gonna be pretty good because in this bed, I'm planning on having lettuce and spinach. So I should be pretty good. Like, the soil should be pretty rich by the time that I want to plant these. So the way that I applied this, y'all, I just took a cup of it and I broadcast it all across the bed. Then I grabbed the garden lime, which, like I said before, is to raise the pH of the soil. Got a cup of that, gently broadcast it all across the bed. And then lastly, like I said before, I added just a little bit of perlite for aeration and drainage. So once I had all of that stuff in the bed, I just went in with the bow rake and I combined all of it with the soil, the compost, the fertilizer, the garden lime, and the perlite. After everything was added to the bed, finally I came in and I watered the entire bed pretty deeply for maybe like 5 minutes. And what this does is it activates everything in the soil, right? But mainly the fertilizer, because that is something that I want to start leaching in the soil way before I'm ready to plant. So it's making sure that that nitrogen is starting to be released, that phosphorus, that potassium, so on and so forth. And it also activates the compost and just makes sure that everything in the soil has a moist environment to actually start like kind of gelling together. Okay, so for the very last step, all I did was apply about 2 inches of cedar wood mulch to the bed just to protect all of the soil and the amendments that I put into it. Now, the reason I did this is because we are smack dab in the middle of August. We haven't gotten temperatures into the 100s yet, but I'm pretty sure that it's on the way. And the last thing I want is for me to apply all of these good amendments to the soil and just have the sun come through and bake the entire bed so it becomes dried and compacted. Like, I do not want to just let this bed sit here with no protection or moisture. So basically I ended up getting about 2 bags of the cedar wood mulch. I covered the soil with that, and as the weeks go by, every week I'm going to come back and I'm going to water this bed over the mulch, let it seep down into the soil, and make sure that this bed still has a pretty fertile environment, moist environment, to make sure that all of my amendments are still gelling and working together, because dry soil doesn't really spell fertile, you know, it's just not gonna work. So that is pretty much what I would recommend. As soon as you add those amendments, put a layer of mulch. It doesn't have to be cedar, it can be straw, it can be something else, but just make sure you protect the soil after you do all of this stuff. From here, I'm just going to let these beds sit until I'm ready to plant. I'm probably not gonna plant until mid to late September, which is a good thing because, like I told y'all before, the fertilizer that I'm using in these beds is kind of strong. So I actually wanna let that kind of mingle with the soil and mellow out a bit, so that I'm not doing something called unintentionally giving my plants fertilizer burn, which is basically when you plant your plants and they get way too much fertilizer at once. So in order to avoid that, I'm just going to let these amendments slowly work over time, mellow out, come to a safe level, and then I should be ready to plant in September. And then, just as a reminder, like I mentioned before, every week I'm going to water these beds so they stay fertile, moist, all that good stuff. Let me know down in the comments if you are preparing for the fall season and how you're gonna do it. If this video helped you, all of the products that I used are linked down in the description. So if you want a shortcut, you want to just pop over to Amazon, get all this stuff, all the links to this stuff that I use will be in the description. I get a small commission when you do choose to use those links, so do consider doing that. And until next time, happy gardening.